Do you agree that that's imposition?
I don't think it is the same thing because I think when Western nations, by the way, I want to say I don't agree with imposing our philosophy or our ideas on other cultures. So if we base the entire point on, well, I agree with this imposition, so why don't I agree with that imposition? I would say I don't agree that Islam should be imposed on other cultures, and I also don't agree that liberalism should be imposed on other cultures, especially not through force, not through not directly, not militarily, not by dominating these cultures by force. I agree that they are imposed even nowadays in a way by saying if you want to be part of this union, then you have to accept these values. Or if you want to benefit from these benefits, then you have to accept these values. If you want to get support from us, if you want to have diplomatic relations with us, then you have to accept these values. That is the imposition that takes place from the point of the view of the West nowadays. But that isn't really quite the same as what Islam did over the 1,400 years, right? You would agree with that.
No, yeah, the Western
When we
imposition
come
is
with
far
Islam,
more brutal.
no, but Islam imposed values through direct war, through declaring war against all the nations that
So,
refused to accept
so
Islam's values.
Operation Iraqi Freedom, was
Well,
that about spreading? Wasn't that justified on the basis of spreading freedom and democracy?
I think that is a very particular case, which
But that's
I
actually the
wouldn't say.
standard case. That's the universal case. Haven't you heard of the white man's burden or the
Of course, but
civilizing mission?
that is just a theory. I mean, the
No,
original
no,
point there
that
is
was a
not
theory
to.
that drove the imperialism and colonialism that we're talking about.
But the point there is not to attack these cultures and spread your values onto them,
No, it
especially not in
is.
today's time.
That's what
Not in today's time.
civilizing burden means. Civilize the savages, and it's not. It wasn't just Muslims. It was Native Americans. It was Africans. It was Chinese, East Asians. Yeah, of course. Like, how can you deny this? There's entire fields, non-Muslims, entire fields of decolonial studies, where they have volumes and volumes cataloging the imposition of white supremacy, European dominance across the entire globe. And it was justified on this idea that it was justified on a racial basis, that the white man is simply more intelligent and has a higher IQ and is therefore able to develop technology that leads to utopia, technology that leads to all of these goods, what they claimed were goods on the basis of the Enlightenment liberal philosophy. Then they had this burden imposed that no, we're going to civilize these Muslims, these Africans, these Chinese. So they come into the light of reason. They let go of their dogmas. They let go of their abuse of women. They let go of their all of these bad things that we find in these savage cultures, and we're going to develop them. We're going to civilize them, and that was the basis. That was the basis of all the imperialism that came from the Western world and the colonization.
But we don't quite see that, though. I mean, let me
What
make
don't you
this
see?
point. When we look at colonization, for example, with colonization, the point was to expand Western power. For example, during it lasted until the First World War, for example, where the purpose of these powers was still to get as much dominance over Middle Eastern and African cultures as possible. And when they got this dominance, for example, they did impose their values. That is true. Which was not the primary goal. However, the primary goal was to exert power over these nations and to expand your own borders.
Well, you're
Whereas
just
with Islam,
proving
for
that it
example,
was. You're just proving that, or you're claiming that wasn't altruistic. That's fine. Like, I don't. I don't. I agree. I agree with you. When Islam wants to expand, it cares about people's afterlife and their flourishing in this life, and the values are meant to inculcate that kind of flourishing. So if you want to say that the West actually doesn't care about freedom and liberty and all of this, fine. I can concede that.
still working with all those nations without making them accept very basic human rights values, such as the right to choose your own religion, or the right to spread your own religion, or the right to leave your religion, the right to criticize your former religion. These rights don't exist in many cultures today. So how can we possibly say that the West, liberalism, similarly and aggressively spreads their ideas and imposes them on others, as Islam does? Because when we look at Islam, we see that wherever Islam went, Islam relentlessly imposed its own worldview.
There's a lot of distinctions here, so I just want to take the time to make them. To respond to your point that there are Muslim countries that are practicing the Sharia, I'd really disagree with that. Yes, there are countries that have remnants of Islamic law, but most of them there's been an imposition of a kind of constitutional democracy, a kind of secularism that has a Muslim flavor to it. Like, you can't say that in a country like Egypt that this is an Islamic state. It's ruled by a secular dictator, and Muslims who advocate for Islamic governance are routinely detained and even murdered and assassinated. So these countries, I'll grant you that the West, in its dominance and imposition across the entire globe, will allow tokenism and will allow Muslims, as long as it doesn't threaten their power. If there are countries that threaten the West's power in any way by even not using the dollar as their currency for international trade, they will be brought into submission. Okay, and this is why it's very hard to dispute this. Like, it's not something that happened years ago. It's an ongoing process.
It's about power, though, right? It's not about ideology. It's about power.
Like I said, we can concede that, but no. The power is through the ideology, and it's through. Look at what's happening throughout the Muslim world. Unfortunately, we find many Muslims who are secularizing, who are leaving their values, and it's because of their entire structure of society has been gutted by a secular system, by the atomization of capitalism, by consumerism, by a global media that is constantly broadcasting a Western secular liberal ideology into everyone's homes, on the internet, on social media, which is highly regulated according to liberal values. Like, I'm worried that this stream is going to be deleted by YouTube for the things that I'm saying. So how can we say that that's not imposition and control and the imposition of ideology? But the other distinction with Islam spreading, So one of the big differences is that because of the historical time period, Muslims never had weapons of mass destruction. We never had chemical weapons. We never had bombs. So the spread of Islam was not bloody in the same way that modern warfare and modern expansionism has been bloody, and that's a big difference. The other thing is that Islam's expansion wasn't racial.
Necessity, though, right?
Out
of the conditions that
genocide is by necessity.
I don't know about that. They weren't as bloody as 20th century expansions, because Islam didn't have access to these weapons of mass destruction, because Islam basically failed before these weapons came into existence.
I mean, I don't know how that's a positive for the West, but okay. So then, when it comes to genocide, the expansion of Islam also wasn't racial. It wasn't racial, whereas in the West, it is racial. The white race, the British and the French and Western Europe, it was on the basis of their supposed higher IQ and there's the civilizing burden, the white man's burden, to expand. So that's another very big difference. Whereas Muslims allowed anyone to convert. So when Muslims were expanding, I agree with you. They incentivized conversion to Islam. So yes, that is an imposition of values, but again, it's altruistic. It's not, we're going to decimate you and kill you because you're not Muslim. No, the impetus was that we want you to convert. And that's why Muslim civilization has been extremely racially, ethnically, and culturally diverse. They've been united by Islam as a religion. We don't see that when it comes to the majority of other civilizations, past and present, which are ethnic in nature, racial in nature. We want to expand our race, our people. And that kind of violence that they have to use is on the basis, well, let's just wipe out the other races and ethnicities. Whereas that's not the impetus, and it wasn't. And and this is not me like putting sugarcoating on it. You can read the actual texts from Islamic scholars from 500, 1,000 years ago.
you would agree that a Buddhist, for example, or a Hindu, or someone who worships rocks and statues, or someone who apostatizes from Islam, like me, for example, wouldn't have the same right in an Islamic society that you as a Muslim would have, right?
Yes, I agree.
You would agree with that. So in an ideal Islamic society, you would be the ideal person. It would be a supremacy of you as a Muslim. Whereas I, as someone who has left Islam, wouldn't even have the right to enjoy those same equal rights, because under Islamic law, I wouldn't any longer be part of the ideal identity of society, which is religion, as opposed to race in Western states. And as a result, I would be executed under an Islamic state. That's true, right?
No, yes, we're going to get to that. But you're conflating two things here. You're making it seem like Islam has this, let's call it like value supremacy. It believes that its values are supreme. Yeah, but I'm saying that that's exactly the same as any other culture, any other universalist system of values and beliefs is true of liberalism, past and present. Liberals are universalists. They believe their values are superior to the values of religion, to Islam. They're also supremacists, and they. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Sorry, there was just a thing.
Do you think that values, liberal values, are superior to religion, or let's say Confucianism, or traditional 18th century Buddhism? So you're a value supremacist as well.
Because as much as governments and traditions restrict society, those people who want to move on and who don't agree with this supreme system will eventually explode and destroy the system. Which is why in liberalism we should allow everyone to be equal and to be free and slowly move on.
Right. So you're just giving a story of why liberalism is supreme or superior in terms of its values. You have justification for that. That's fine. That's fine. Well, let me finish. You have that story that you're giving, and I can provide a story for why Islam is superior and why these liberal values are incoherent, because that's what I claimed at the beginning of our discussion. So, but the point that I want to emphasize here, and I think it's very crucial, is that you are still a supremacist in terms of your values, in terms of liberalism. That's the history of the Western world.
That it does not impose on the same level, especially not today. I mean,
today is the most suppressive, brutal regime that has ever existed. The amount of control that the secular liberal regimes and this world order imposes on the individual is unprecedented in every single respect, because of technology, because of surveillance. Like, you can't go and park your car in a certain part of the street without the state hammering you if it's against the law or if it's against the policy, right?
Okay.
The amount of control and oppression that exists today is far greater than anything from any civilization in the past. And that's because of technology. It's because of the logic of the state and secularism, right? This is the logic of secularism that is imposed. It is imposed across the entire world. You don't even a small Southeast Asian country like Brunei announcing, like a population less than 1 million, I think, announcing that it wants to, reintroduce hudud, this penal punishment within Islamic law. It can't announce that without the entire world saying that it's going to sanction it. It's going to. There's laws introduced by Ilhan Omar in Congress. The Muslim who is anti-Sharia. How is that not imposition? Right. That is brutal imposition.
What were the methods used in order to impose
the threat of sanctions?
The threat of sanctions.
Sanctions are extremely violent.
Can you briefly define what sanctions are?
Sanctions means we're not going to trade with your country. We've gotten your country dependent on our money and our resources through trade. You're now hooked, right? You're hooked on the world economically. We're going to cut that off. Like, haven't you read Confessions of an Economic Hitman?
Of course. But
okay, is that fiction or fact?
What I'm trying to get to here is, you're saying that liberal values are brutally imposed on the rest of the world, but the example that you're giving is simply Western people saying, hey, if you impose a death penalty for gay people, then we will stop trading with you.
Yeah, to starve you. To starve you, yeah. To starve your children, like we did with Iraq. 500,000 children starved to death. And when Madeleine Albright, the Secretary of State under Bill Clinton, was asked in the 90s, do you think that that's a cost that should be paid for our values, for U.S. interests? And she said, yeah, 500,000 children, no problem. Let them starve. Let them starve from sanctions. That's the most violent thing that you can find in history. Muslims never did anything like that. Muslims never starved 500,000 children. Where? Show me.
Doesn't work. So let's imagine this scenario. An Islamic empire exists. Next to it, a tiny country says, "Hey, we accepted Islam before, but we don't really want to abide by that right now anymore. So forget about Islam. From now on, we will open gay clubs here. People will dance around, will be gay, will be naked, and this will all be approved by us in the name of tolerance and whatever. And you should just keep out of that." What would the Islamic Empire do in that position as a reaction?
It would invade. It would invade, and I conceded that at the beginning. I said that there's force, and there's a good reason for the benefit of those people. For the benefit of those people, they would Islam would come and impose Islamic law. Yeah, of course, I conceded that. Just like the liberal supremacist will say that, oh, this country is not allowing gay sex and gay clubs, and this country is not there's marriages, like they practice polygamy, they practice their women have to cover in this particular way, their women aren't allowed to do X, Y, and Z. We know that they're a small country of agrarian farmers and goat herders. Guess what? We're going to drone them incessantly. We're going to invade and make sure that their women take off the burqa and that their women are sent to read, our Western literature. And we're going to drone them and invade them, and we're going to drive them into the ground, send them back to the Stone Age if they don't accept.
Okay, I think we're going far off the point.
That is the point. That is exactly the point.
I want to ask you why you would think that that imposing sanctions, as in we will not trade with you, like we, the West, will not trade with you any longer if you impose these laws, why that is more brutal than invading a country and forcibly changing the law of the country. How is that? How do you define it? If you just can briefly explain it.
I didn't say that they're more or less. I didn't say they're more or less.
You said it's more brutal.
No, I said as a whole, like just because of the scale of it, like you're switching between a historical comparison versus a conceptual comparison. Nothing that Muslims have done historically is as brutal as the mass killing that has occurred by the hands of the West, and that's because of technology, right?
But we are now not comparing concepts, but rather just
right. So that was the historical comparison, but you're sliding in back and forth between them. Conceptually, I agree with you that all else being equal, ceteris paribus, all things being equal, the sanctions are going to be potentially less violent. It depends on the nature of it, but they're both coercive. That was the point.
Okay, so we have to come to the point that they are both in a way force. So they're both in a way.
Come on, 500,000 children, Iraqi children, starving to death. That's not force.
But I want to ask you, where do you live, Daniel?
I mean, I live in the U.S.
You live in the U.S. Why do you live in the U.S.? I mean, this is a question.
Can I just explain that this system of liberalism is imposed on the entire globe, and that there is no country in the world today that actually implements the Sharia in the fullest meaning and sense of it? I wish that I could go to a country and that's ruled by Sharia that the West won't bomb and sanction and destroy. I wish I had that opportunity, but unfortunately I can't because of liberal supremacism. Where? What country? What country should I move to? What country should I move to?
Any country.
Should I move to Saudi Arabia, where they're imprisoning scholars for saying anything in line with the Sharia? If I were in Saudi,
example, yes.
Right? Why are they doing that? Saudi is doing that because of who? The West, right? Because of Israel, right? Because of America, right?
Okay. In Islam, that's, for example, one wife and one husband and four wives, whatever. But we know, for example, that it is natural for a woman, meanwhile, to want to have sex with different people. That this is something that we have also established in psychology.
No, women are hypergamous, right? Women are hypergamous, right? They want to have one partner who is fully committed to them, but they want the best partner possible. So if they are with, true. Yes, this is hypergamy. Again, go to your psychology. Have you heard of the term hypergamy?
I am aware, but it is not true that women are naturally desiring to be loyal to this. It is true that both men
they're loyal unless they see someone who's better. That's the thing. Like the woman, a hypergamous woman, right? So I concede this. Like hypergamy doesn't mean monogamy. It means like one committed relationship. If you're with the alpha, but if a bigger alpha comes, then the woman is going to be attracted to this other guy, right? And wants to be with him. So that's not exactly monogamy, but this is a kind of desire that comes about. But not all desires are conducive to long-term happiness. What does show, and this is what Jonathan Haidt in Righteous Minds, in I think chapter 4 or 5, he argues that the determinant of long-term happiness is stable families. And what is more conducive? It's an objective question. What system of life and what values are more conducive to long-term stable families versus not? If you have a system that allows constant fornication, constant cheating, that's less conducive to a stable family than Islam that has punishments and social sanction in general. And strict separation between the genders that reduces the amount of intergender mixing that can lead to cheating. It can lead to dissatisfaction because women, as you said, they're hypergamous. So she's with her husband, but she's hanging out with friends and she notices, oh, there's a Chad. There's this great guy that's not my husband. I wish I was with him. This dissatisfaction is decreasing her overall happiness. Right? And Islam is blocking that. Islam is preventing that. And that's why many non-Muslims who are, part of this red-pilled understanding, they will make statements like Islam is right about women. Islam is right about these issues because of the traditional laws that are embedded within Islam.
Asking sheikhs for help, asking you for help, being on Islam Reddit and wondering why they can just not stop masturbating and why they want to jump on every woman. It just doesn't work. This is not natural. There is no way to justify this. There is no way to argue that this is what peace is and this is how you provide peace, and then to argue that you should crack down on people's basic desires. This doesn't work. It has never worked, which is why Islamic societies are failing. Cracking. It doesn't work. I don't understand how you are getting there, how you can justify this.
Okay, I think that a lot of what you're saying is based on an extreme right-wing anti-immigrant narrative. And I think I can dispute pretty much all of these kinds of statistics that you're alluding to without actually citing. But I'll just make it easier for you. I'll make it very easy. I'll concede. Okay, you're right. Some of these immigrants, they are engaging in crime more. They are engaging in sexual assault more than the native population. Disproportionately. I'll concede. Let me just concede that, even though I question the factual basis of that, but just for the sake of argument, I'll concede all of those things. It has a very clear explanation, right? Because these people are coming from traditional societies with bottom-up order, social cohesion based on family values, traditional values. And they're coming to countries that don't have those structures. They're coming to societies that are atomized as individuals separated from their families, separated from extended families, right? And of course, that's going to lead to chaos. Of course, this is like going fish out of water, right? Because the only way that the West is able to maintain order without these traditional structures is through conditioning, okay? Psychologically conditioning from a young age children to act in accordance with the dictates of the nation state through a massive educational structure and conditioning through media, through the status quo, constantly. That's the only reason there's order in the West, is because of this top-down system. Think about it, right? A child born in the West, from the minute that he steps into the world, he's being controlled by an institution, because children are born in a hospital system that has regulations, hospital system that will immediately grab the child, weigh it, measure it, inject it, right? The child is maybe a couple of months with the mother. Then she has to go back to work, right? She's a strong, independent woman. She goes back to the workplace. That baby has to go to another institution, daycare. It's not even a year old and is already being institutionalized until preschool and then kindergarten and then primary school, high school. All institutions, 40 hours a week, right? With strangers, individuals that have no relation to him, no blood relation, not family, not father and mother, in those kinds of institutions. Then he goes to college, then he gets a job, then he lives and works in this corporate system, sucking out his life from him, right? Going 40 hours, 50 hours a week to work. And then coming home, he doesn't have a real marriage because, look, you have Tinder. Why even bother with commitment? Why bother with a marriage? Just sit in front of your laptop or the computer or TV, watch Netflix, watch Game of Thrones, then order on Uber Eats, order your food. And that's the modern existence, living in your little apartment, working and paying rent, day after day after day after day. This is the modern existence. Then you get to a certain age. Your kids, if you have maybe 1.2 children, as is the average fertility rate in the Western world, maybe they care about you, maybe not. You practically don't know them. How could you when they're in their institution and you're in your own corporate world? Then you get to a certain age of becoming elderly. You have to be put in a home and you're sitting and rotting away trying to live the rest of your days again in front of the TV, and then you die. And if you die in your own apartment, no one will even know that you're dead, because your kids aren't visiting you, you don't have a wife, you've been divorced for 30 years, and this is so common, individuals, elderly, dying by themselves in their apartment, that there are entire industries for cleaning it out, because the only way that anyone knows that you're dead is the stench of your corpse wafts into the apartment building, and your neighbors notice the stench and they call these cleaning companies to come in and clean up your decaying corpse because you've been there for 3 months. That is let me finish. You painted your picture of immigrant rapists. Let me paint a picture for you. Okay? This is modern life. This is the atomized existence in the nation state. Okay? This is what liberalism wants for people. This is what liberalism is trying to impose on the entire globe. Okay? And they're being successful because of people like you. But people like you who are propagandists against Islam, advocating this kind of liberal freedom. Oh, you're so free. You can sit in front of Netflix and order Uber Eats. So much freedom. Just pursue your dreams. Right? Your college loans, you have $100,000 in, no, let me finish. You have $100,000 in college loans that you have to pay off. So you have to work some soulless job so you can make enough money because you're so far in debt. You can't depend on a stable, loving relationship because all of society is pounding into your head that you have sexual freedom. You need to be active, sexually active. And you're consuming all of this media that glorifies fornication and adultery. You have a system that's telling women that, oh, you shouldn't be tied down by a man. You're independent. You're an independent woman. Okay? You need to spread your wings, right? Yeah, this is a dystopia, man. This is a dystopia. This is worse. George Orwell couldn't have imagined the kind of dystopia that we're living in. Okay, that's how crazy it is. That's been normalized. It's all part of the liberal, atomized nation-state plan. Islam is the alternative to this.
Everybody, Muslims and non-Muslims, knows that that in Muslim masculinity, that among Muslim men, that Muslim men have a very big issue with sexuality. Everybody knows this.
How could that be possible? Like, how could that be possible? Right? They're just rapists. Muslims are just rapists. That's your argument?
It is not. That's not what I said. I clearly explained that the system, that the idea of Islam imposing sexuality in such a way on you that it is so restrictive and so ridiculously restrictive, as I said, causes people. I talk about myself. I'm not saying I'm a rapist, but I'm saying I am definitely much more sensitive to sex and to sexual differences, to women, to the skin of a woman, than a Western person is. And that is because I was conditioned by Islam. This is a very natural consequence of Islam, and everybody knows.
What's wrong with that? That's you have healthy sexuality. You're sensitive to the beauty of a woman. How about some of these modern Western porn addicted boys in Britain? Like, it's a public health crisis where they can't even get off through sexual relations anymore because porn has restructured their minds and their pleasure centers. They rather sit in front of a computer and masturbate, these Westerners, than actually have relations with a woman, because a woman doesn't actually arouse them anymore. A physical woman.
False equivalency.
You're describing Muslim sexuality. Let's describe Western sexual. No. Okay, why not?
Because that's a false equivalency. This is very basic logic. That's a complete false equivalency. This is very basic.
I'm not equating them.
I'm comparing an essential system in Islamic society, how Islam is imposed by a fundamental rule of how sexuality is viewed onto young people in Islam, and what that leads to. You are comparing a tool like porn in Western society that certain people in Western society have developed, that some people misuse. You are comparing these two things. Porn is not a fundamental value, a fundamental teaching of liberalism or of Western society. It is simply a product of it, such as many other products
of the consumerist.
That's a false equivalency.
No, it's not. I mean, the whole argument.
How is it not? It's a complete false equivalency. It's very easy to see.
No, I wasn't trying to equate them. I'm saying that this is not a rosy picture of Western freedom and liberalism that you're portraying is not so rosy as you want to depict it, right?
No,
you give people the choice, right? You give people. Okay, so the entire Western world is pumping that in. It's a $60 billion industry. And by the way, porn doesn't mean the internet, right? Pornography, in terms of sexualizing women and objectifying women, is through all media.
You learn about sex and sexuality. You learn that a woman will always strive to have her own man, and will want to own this own man, even more so than a man wants to have her own woman. A woman has even stronger feelings for having her own man than a man has. A man can just go around and can have sex with this one and that one and this one, and can completely ignore the feelings of the one woman. This works much more with the nature of a man than it works with the nature of a woman. A woman would like to own her partner, whereas Islam provides a society where, ironically, a man can have 4 wives, and in which the 4th wife, or the 3rd wife, or the 2nd wife will be in a constant competition with the other wives for her own happiness. So it is ironic that if we are looking for happiness in a society, that you would suggest an Islamic society where a woman will never be essentially happy if she is in a marriage that is permissible within Islam.
No, like the stable families don't, or polygyny with a man and multiple women, that doesn't contradict a stable family structure. And that's why it was practiced far beyond just Muslims. Many societies had the polygamy. Polygamy became something that was taboo because of Western Christianity and the Catholic Church, that decided just out of the blue within medieval times that now we're going to prohibit polygamy. Prior to that, within Europe even, polygamy has been practiced. And this is something that is, you want to talk about science and empiricism, it's because of the difference in reproduction between men and women. A man can impregnate multiple women, whereas a woman can, when she's impregnated by one man, she has to be pregnant for 9 months. And so there's a much higher reproductive toll on a woman. And so the woman actually is very interested in making sure to find a spouse to impregnate her, or we're talking about biologically, instinctually. She wants to mate with the best male that she can find, right? This is hypergamy. This is exactly what we were referring to earlier. So this difference between men and women and the instincts for that is something that Islam acknowledges and institutionalizes. The women actually.
The point we're talking about the point. The point is that a woman naturally. We argued that we must maximize the benefit of society.
No,
based on what
you mentioned maximizing individual benefit. Her individual wants. That's not what we're talking about. This is your liberal individualist thinking. The system is maximizing the stable family. You want to have the most families and the most children, right? That's what is the basis of society, and it will contradict at different times an individual's own wants and desires. Yeah, Islam is not individualist.
How is it justified? You cannot possibly logically justify that, in order to maximize the benefit of society, it is ideal to have multiple wives for a man.
I said that. Look, follow the argument. Stable families. The biggest determinant of human happiness is a stable family. Okay, and what actually benefits a society as a whole is having the most number of these stable families, as opposed to broken families or single parent families. So you want to maximize the number of families. You want to maximize also, there's a demographic component, because if you want to talk evolutionarily, or if you want to just talk about human history, most of human history, you didn't have weapons of mass destruction. So war was on the basis of numbers. One army fighting the other, and the best chance of you winning the war, the biggest determinant of you being successful in a battle, is the numbers that you have. So high birth rate is actually tied to survival and preservation of your society and your civilization. So having more, because you're preventing your own extermination. Polygamy helps you have one man and multiple women that are able to produce more children, and the size of your society will increase, and that protects you from invasion. It protects you from being dominated. And this can be explained on a religious basis. If you prefer evolution, you want to talk about science and evolution, feel free to explain why evolutionarily polygamy and this polygamous sentiment would evolve within the human mind. It's because it's, according to evolutionary biologists, it's adaptive. It's adaptive behavior, meaning it helps the species more when individuals engage in that kind of behavior. So, but don't think about individually, right? Society as a whole, it does. Society as a whole benefits by maximizing stable families. You have more stable families in a polygamous relationship than individuals.
First off, it doesn't. You have the same number of men and women. You have the same number of. If there is polygamy, if there is polygyny dominant in the society, you will have more men that cannot find women. We don't have this. This is a huge.
First of all, in most societies,
we don't have much more women than
men.
In
most societies, look, when a woman is. In most societies, women actually outnumber men. Okay?
No, not very much. Maybe like 1 to what?
Yeah, so
not very much. Not even double. You cannot even argue that
it's not double, but that difference is significant, and that's the same percentage that can benefit from polygamy. This is like we're quibbling over a point. Like the basic point that I'm making. You want to dispute it, fine, but I think it's clear to the audience that you can have more children through polygamous behavior. Because there are many women in society that they are not high value females. They're not high value companions, and they would love to be a second wife or a third wife or a fourth wife to high value males. And that actually benefits. Go back to evolution, right? That's the science that you want to accept. So explain why polygamy is something that's hardwired in the human mind if it's not adaptive.
It is not. Polygamy is not hardwired.
It is. No, look at chimpanzees. Look at chimpanzees. Look at any of the great apes. They're all polygamous.
Promiscuity is. Polygamy is not.
They're all polygamous. No, they're not promiscuous, because the alpha male does not allow the betas to mate with his mates. They're not promiscuous.
Look at the bonobos. Look at the bonobos, for example. Bonobos
chimpanzees. Explain chimpanzees. Explain chimpanzees. They're the closest,
I'm
according to you,
sure
right?
they are.
They're evolutionarily the closest to human beings. Why are they polygamous?
Bonobos are also very close. We can pick and choose as we want. I don't want to make the point. If you look at
Bonobos,
are
they're also
usually-
polygamous.
No, they're not. They have sex however they want. They have completely free liberal sexual behavior. Bonobos are known for that. You can pick chimpanzees. I can pick bonobos to make the point. But
No, but evolutionarily, are we closer to chimpanzees or bonobos?
I believe we're closer to chimpanzees, but
Okay,
we're
there
also
you
very
go.
close to bonobos. So that's
You
not
made
really,
the point.
It doesn't really support the argument here.
It does.
It does not. It does not.
Humans are polygamous. Look at the
Okay.
societies throughout history. You think that polygamy was just
I think
imposed
we can go,
from
we can
religion?
go on this forever, but I want
Look
to
at
make
Chinese
two points.
society.
Number
Look
one
at
is
Hindu
that,
society.
that
Look at
for
South
you as a
American
man, it is
society.
easy to
Many
say
of these
that,
many of these societies
that
were
women
polygamous.
would like. Go look at that. This is basic psychology: positive punishment, negative punishment.
You said
It
that
it
jailing is a
unanimous in
punishment. We
psychology.
both agree that punishments have to exist. They're a necessary evil,
No,
right?
I don't think so.
Then where are we going to put the rapists?
Corrective behavior.
All those Muslim immigrant rapists, where are you going to put them?
Corrective behavior.
Where?
Co- co-
They don't want corrective behavior.
correct-
they don't want corrective behavior.
facilities. We
Like a jail, they're locked
I
up?
I don't think that a Muslim who is caught raping somebody in the West, in Germany or in America, should be put onto a board or whatever it is, and lashed 100 times. That is absolutely horrible. That is absolutely completely.
You prefer lenience for
bigger-
rapists.
Bigger than the crime that has been committed. That is inhuman. It does not correct the behavior. The rapist will come out and he will not think, "Oh, yeah, I should learn from this punishment. I should not do this again." We know psychologically seen that what happens
Look at
here,
racism.
and this
Look
is-
at the. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Daniel,
Sorry, go ahead.
this is the main argument against Islamic society and Islamic laws. What happens if you punish someone harshly with physical punishment? If you punish somebody by flogging them, go out, look at this, look up the psychology. What happens if you punish
Look up the
somebody
psychology is not an
physically?
argument.
What happens if you punish somebody physically is that this person doesn't think, "Oh, I should correct my behavior." What this person thinks is that, "Oh, I shouldn't do this behavior and be caught. I should do it when
That's
I
with
have
any
access to this behavior."
You can make the same argument for any punishment.
I know, but the harsher
Then it's not an
punishment
argument
has
against
the
Islam.
biggest rebound. The harsher
No,
punishment.
no.
has
Where's
the
the
biggest rebound.
statistics for that? Show me the statistics for that. You're just making a claim.
Forever. I can afterwards release statistics on what positive punishment and negative punishment.
I gave you a citation. Peter Moskos, in defense of flogging, he says that jail actually does not rehabilitate,
I am
and
not
flogging
arguing
is
for
much
jail.
better in correcting behavior and deterring crime. I gave you a reference. You give me one.
I'm not talking for jail. I'm not defending jail. I'm not saying, "Oh, we should jail people instead of flogging people." I'm saying that flogging people and executing people is not the solution. It is the opposite of the solution. It is a. For
You haven't
example,
given a
if
solution.
child-
How do you punish people
If a
then?
child. I think we should come to the main point because we are far above our time actually, and we have still not discussed why you would think or how we could argue that your definition of a just society is that a society should be should find fulfillment, should be collectively happy, and we can only make it collectively fulfilled and collectively happy by enforcing the laws of the Islamic Sharia, for example, by executing homosexuals, executing apostates, executing adulterers, and all that stuff. Why do you think this is what should be required from a society?
You set me up by asking the question, and I gave you just a straight answer, like, is this punishable by death and so forth? But you didn't give me a chance to fully justify and finish the argument, because we got into side issues. But let me just finish the argument with homosexuality as well. So homosexuality also contravenes stable families. It's something that frustrates stable families, and this is for a lot of reasons. Evolutionarily also, a kind of disgust reaction to homosexual behavior is universal. It's actually instinctual. And this is something that I ask those who believe in evolution, explain why such a feeling of disgust would evolve within humans, disgust for male on male sexual behavior. And to justify this argument, look at the paper, The Association Between Disgust, Sensitivity, and Negative Attitudes Towards Homosexuality. Also
I have
look
a very
at
simple answer to that.
also look at Gordon Gallup, who wrote, or that study is by Gordon Gallup, and then I have some other studies that I can cite for you as well. But Gordon Gallup argues that this disgust reaction is universal. It's found across all societies. There's a Chinese study that also makes the same point. But this kind of attitude, he argues, of disgust is towards homosexuality is universal, and it's not xenophobia. Because you might say that, well, people are disgusted by it because they're xenophobic. And Gordon Gallup, this sociologist at the University of Albany, who published his papers on 4 separate studies that he did, showed that no, it's not because of xenophobia. He distinguishes this disgust to homosexual behavior is its own separate reaction. It's not just xenophobia or fear of the other. But why? What is the evolutionary basis for that? Gordon Gallup makes a very clear argument. He says that when we look at homosexual behavior, where does homosexuality come from? There is a high correlation between becoming homosexual in orientation and early childhood sexual experience. So when a boy at a young age comes into sexual contact with a male adult, that seems to be highly correlated with having a homosexual orientation later in life. So basically molestation, child molestation and homosexuality, there is a very strong correlation between them, and there's a lot of studies on that as well, such as does physical abuse, sexual abuse, or neglect in childhood increase the likelihood of same-sex sexual relationships and cohabitation, by Helen Wilson, published in 2008. And then there's also comparative data of childhood and adolescence molestation in heterosexual and homosexual persons by Marie Tomeo in 2001. So they prove this, peer-reviewed research, that there is a correlation. So imagine that you want to this is Gordon Gallup's explanation. You are a man who wants a large family with children, a stable family, you want grandchildren, and that's your instinct. Instinctually, you have that. And then homosexuals are molesting your children and causing them to be homosexuals because of that behavior. Your genes are not going to be spread. So disgust and protecting your children from contact with homosexuals is actually instinctual because it's evolutionarily adaptive. This is Gordon Gallup's argument. This is Gordon Gallup's argument.
Number one, I want to say.
Let me finish the argument.
It doesn't support the point at all.
It does. Why is it evolutionary? Why is it evolutionarily adaptive?
Daniel,
Why?
I want to go on.
Why are you interrupting?
Because I want to.
Why are you interrupting?
Because we agreed at the very beginning of our conversation before.
No, we agreed that you wouldn't talk over me. So you set me up by saying yes, homosexuals should get homosexual behavior deserves capital punishment. You set that up, and then you don't let me explain fully. You interrupt me in the middle of the argument. How's that fair?
You interrupt me all the time, Daniel. I could just mute you here. I don't do that. You interrupt me all the time. We agreed before our chat that we will have very simple, short questions and short answers. Your questions.
But this is a complicated,
like whole propaganda of
no, it's not propaganda. These peer-reviewed research is propaganda.
I will mute you for a second. I'm sorry. Homosexual people feel disgust by looking at or thinking of a heterosexual intercourse. How exactly does this strengthen your point? I don't want you to go into lengthy presentations.
I explained how it supports my point. Let me finish the argument without interrupting me.
You're not finishing arguments. You're building.
Yeah, I know I'm not finishing because you interrupt, and then you might mute me. That's why I'm not finishing arguments. Let me finish the step-by-step points. You see, you're not letting me talk. Let me finish my points.
I don't want you to go to go for 5
Yeah, of
minutes
course
talking
you
about
don't want
scientific
the actual full argument. I know, because every time I bring up
I don't
research,
want-
I bring up points, you say this is pseudoscience, you just hand wave. That's the only way that you're arguing. You don't want to confront the evidence.
Daniel,
It's
from the very
okay.
beginning of
Okay?
our conversation,
Look,
from the very
if
beginning
you
of our
can't handle the
conversation-
points that I'm bringing up without resorting, oh, but this doesn't make sense. Okay, that's your response to everything. Oh, this doesn't make sense. Okay, make an argument, make counterpoints, but you don't even let me speak. Okay,
Daniel,
let me
from the very
finish
beginning
the
of our-
argument. Let me finish the argument. You have universal discussed reactions. Why is
Daniel,
that?
from the very beginning of our conversation, I have agreed from the
Why
very beginning
is-
to you that this is not meant to be a debate. This is meant to be a
I'm not
conversation
debating. I'm just
where-
trying to make my point. If it's not a debate, why are you interrupting me?
You cannot make me. You cannot even let me make a fucking disclaimer for 1 second. Are you kidding me? I thought I was being. I thought I was too emotional and too impatient for a discussion. I seriously thought that before we had this discussion. From the very beginning of this conversation, you have numerous times talked for 5 minutes, 6 minutes, 7 minutes, and I haven't interrupted.
You have as well.
Whenever I begin to talk, you are throwing in so many things. It is ridiculous. We're not getting anywhere because I cannot say it. I cannot put a single thought out there without you interrupting me, and I have to listen to you talk for 7.
Look, you want to put a
minutes.
timer? You want to put a timer? We can put a timer. 5-minute allocation, me and you.
We can leave that to a debate.
No,
it was
because you
very
interrupt my
clear-
points before I can make them. You interrupt my arguments before I can complete them. Let me finish the argument.
In too much data and evidence. That's not what I'm doing. I'm accusing you of bringing up irrelevant evidence that doesn't lead to your point at all. You're bringing it up as a study.
According to you just hand wave. It doesn't lead to my point. How? Look,
Okay,
let me
this is-
simplify it. Let
this
me
is the
simplify
one-
the
this is
argument.
the
I'll
one
make it.
single
I'll
time.
summarize it. I'll summarize
I
it for
can-
you. Look, I'll summarize it very close. Come on.
This is the one single time.
He muted me, by
after
the way.
Daniel Haqiqatjou has done this for
He
5,
muted
6
me,
times.
so-
This is the one single time. You're muted, by the way. No one can
Yeah,
hear
I
you.
know.
This
My
is
audience
the
can hear me.
one single time that I will actually appeal
Yeah.
to the audience and
See,
will say,
he can't
"Dear
really-
audience,
he can't
look
really
at this
deal with
conversation
evidence."
and decide for yourselves. Do you believe that slavery is an ideal system? Do you believe that there should be slaves in a society?
Well, we're getting off the topic. We can talk about slavery.
No, this is part of the conversation. Do you think slavery is okay?
Yeah, I mean, slavery is something that I do not find to be immoral, and I can give you an argument for that. But if you interrupt me, then there's no point. So, okay, slavery. You want to talk about slavery? There's a very interesting quote from this anthropologist named David Graeber. He wrote a book called Debt, a 5,000-year history. But he's an accomplished anthropologist. Anyway, he says that if we brought someone like Aristotle or we brought someone from the past to modern society, that figure from the past would think that most people in society are in fact slaves. Okay? They're actually in fact slaves because our understanding of what is slavery, when we use that word, we think about chattel slavery, we think about 12 years a slave, things like this, these kinds of images of racial chattel slavery. And this is actually not historically universal. That's in America's history of transatlantic slavery. But most slavery in history did not look like that. In fact, every civilization, without exception, practiced slavery and slave labor within history, including Europe and so forth, with feudalism and transatlantic slavery, as I mentioned. So when it came to pre-modern societies, if one side defeats another side, you have two countries in a war, then what do you do with the losers? What does the losing side do? You either slaughter them or you enslave them. You can't just let them go and return because they're going to be angry, they're going to reproduce, get stronger, and then come and pose a threat, an existential threat.
I completely agree.
Okay, so that's something that had to be the case in pre-modern societies, and their slavery was the slavery of Islam was not racially based. It was based on prisoners of war. In fact, Islam limited the avenues of entrance into slavery, and Islam was very good at integrating these conquered people into Muslim society, where the slave class ended up becoming very powerful and very knowledgeable, educated Muslims within overall Muslim society, because the Islamic state, Islamic law was not based on race, it was based on belief, as we discussed already. So, but the liberal mind has a problem with this idea of owning a person, right? Would you say that's the case? Because at the end of the day, okay, Islam treated slaves great and nice. That doesn't address the fundamental moral problem with slavery, according to the liberal mind. According to the liberal mind, ownership. It doesn't matter if the slave is living the life, an opulent life, but as long as he's owned, that is the problem. And the response to that is, historically, slave labor was the dominant form of labor. Wage labor was actually relatively rare. And there was a debate historically around the time of the Industrial Revolution in American history where wage labor was increasing. And there was a debate on whether slave labor and wage labor are really distinct. Is there really a fundamental difference between wage labor and slave labor? And the argument that people would use is that slavery, is there a difference between owning someone versus renting someone? And this was a conceptual debate that they had, and many non-Muslim Western thinkers, liberal thinkers, argued that no, renting someone is worse, because think about the difference between owning a car and renting a car. When you rent a car, you drive it, in a very abusive kind of way, as opposed to owning it, where that's your investment, you care about it. Anyway, so that's something that's uncomfortable for people who are raised in the West, but this is actually a reality, and this conceptually, this idea of renting a person versus owning a person, there was no distinction between it. If you were a wage laborer historically, you might as well have been a slave. It's the same thing. It was the same thing within all of these societies. Even feudalism. Is feudalism really different from slavery? Even though you're given wages and you're given a portioned, a certain livelihood, is that really different from slavery? No, it's a basic concept. So the concepts, the legal concepts underlying slavery exist within the employer-employee contract of wage labor, and it's a cultural difference. In many cultures, there's not really a difference between saying that person A, like Ridvan, owns George. Okay, that's a slave relationship. Ridvan owns George. There's not really a difference between that and saying that George has a contractual obligation to Ridvan. Okay, because they both imply force. If you're contractually obligated to someone, that implies force, because if you don't pay up and you don't meet the contract, then you're liable to be punished by the law or punished by Ridvan, and Ridvan can extract that debt from you by force, and if you don't pay up, he can prosecute you. The sheriff can come and can execute you. So there's inherent violence in all contractual agreements, and this is something that leftist and communist thinkers were arguing in the 20th century, because they want to say that capitalism is essentially coercive. Capitalism is no different than slavery, and so you have this entire communist, leftist, Marxist tradition of arguing that capitalism is really fundamentally no different than slavery. So these are things that we can analyze and talk about at great length, but these are some of the ideas that we should pursue in our hunger for truth. Now, let me just make a point about apostasy, just to wrap it up.
Sure. Why should I be punished? You will go again into how that serves the.
No, this is not. I mean, this is because all of the previous arguments were based on kinship and family relations and building stable families. But when it comes to apostasy, it's based on similarity and similarity between people. So shared values, like being the same religion, because historically Islam was not based on race. Islam did not have ethnic and racial conflict like you'd see in other empires, like the Roman Empire and so forth, because it wasn't racial or ethnic. It was on the basis of similar religion. So this is a source of order and cohesion as well. And those who basically leave the religion, they pose a major threat to that social order and that social cohesion. And this is a very violent act to leave the religion, because all of society is based, that cohesion and order, there's not a top-down structure that is imposing like you see in the West and in the modern nation state. You have society that has this logic of cohesion because of shared similarity in religion. We have the same values, and all of these like family structure, family relations, social structure, communal structure, and so forth at every level depends on a shared religious belief. So if someone opts out of that, it threatens that order. And so there is a clear harm to people in life. Obviously, we can talk about the afterlife and the harm that's caused by someone leaving Islam, but we're just making points that a non-Muslim would agree with. There is tangible harm to society when you have defectors, and every society punishes defectors, often with death. And liberal society is no different. Modern liberal society is no different in punishing defectors. And we see this to this day, but definitely throughout the colonial period, that the liberal colonizers, when they take over certain territories, they punish with death, with imprisonment, anyone who speaks out against the liberal secular order and the colonial powers. We saw this throughout North Africa, in the subcontinent. Millions of Muslims were killed because of their opposition, their ideological opposition to liberalism. Okay, so they defected from the colonial power. The liberal powers justified that, look, we are trying to maintain our power, therefore we have to kill these defectors, because if Muslims start speaking against us, the colonizer, then they're going to, we're the minority, they're going to band together and they're going to overthrow us, they're going to fight jihad against us and expel us. So we cannot allow any dissension and defection. We have to punish things like disrespect to the French symbols or the British symbols, disrespect to British values or French values or Dutch values. We have to punish that very severely. And liberal thinkers justified that. And they said that, such figures like John Stuart Mill, that the savages, you have to limit their freedom of speech. You have to limit them because you're trying to civilize them. You're trying to bring them to a state of civilization. So you have to limit their speech very severely in order to do that. Then once the liberal order is established, then suddenly, and there's no threat to the liberal order, then suddenly you're tolerant of free speech. When I, for example, speak against the US government, like someone might say, no one in a secular country is killed for denouncing the government. No one is killed in the West for denouncing Donald Trump or any of these regimes or presidents. See how much freedom of speech we have? See how much tolerance we have? Well, this is like comparing apples and oranges, because you can't really compare that to apostasy. In these Western states, Donald Trump is not threatened if I call him an idiot. Donald Trump and the U.S. regime is not threatened by me speaking out against them. If I were to reach a position and more people were thinking about going against the government, then the government would crack down. Then suddenly free speech is no longer allowed. So it's very convenient of the West and of liberal regimes that when their power is not secure, they do not allow free speech. In fact, they kill people, they kill defectors, and then once they've entrenched power, then they'll allow things that don't actually threaten their power. Whereas in Islam, apostasy is a major threat to the individual's happiness, his family's happiness, his community's happiness. So there is a practical benefit to deterring it, and you deter it with severe punishment and capital punishment. So that's the argument.
Um, I would say that doesn't answer a single question. I appreciate the points you've made, but I don't think it answers a question. I think it is very similar to how many modern Muslims attempt to justify apostasy by bringing up treason in the West, for example, or treason in other cultures, for example, where you reveal the secrets of the state, and then the state wants to go after you.
It's a different argument.
No, I understand it is different, but I think it is very similar, because I don't think any example that you have given actually justifies or is actually similar to the system of apostasy in Islam in any way. Even if you consider that these that an Islamic society and the Western society are fundamentally different. In the West, no one is being persecuted, no one is being prosecuted, because they have endangered the society and endangered the foundations of society through speech that is unacceptable.
You think the civil rights leaders were not cracked down on, imprisoned and killed, assassinated?
Of course they
were. In a secular country? Why was Martin Luther King assassinated? Why were these figures assassinated in the West?
I don't understand how that is
for their beliefs, their belief in racial equality. Why were they assassinated?
I don't understand how that's a good comparison, because you would argue that people like Martin Luther King argued for the foundations, argued for the progress of liberalism. So the authorities of the liberal
they were defectors from the status quo, right?
Of course, but that's a very different example. I mean, you are comparing people who argue for better rights, for equality, which is, by the way, a value of liberalism. Martin Luther King and people like him were part of this movement, of the civil rights movement, because of liberalism, because they argued for better liberal values. And the authorities that opposed them, and the people that opposed them, and the people that eventually conceded, were the gatekeepers of old liberalism, which eventually changed into the better version of liberalism. That's the entire point of liberalism, to gradually make social progress. If you can't compare that to leaving Islam in an Islamic society, because number one, in a liberal society, if you want to protest and you want to make social progress, you're wanting to change society for the better. You are comparing that to Islam. In Islamic society, you cannot make society better. It's not possible. You leave Islam. You are no longer a Muslim. You're not arguing for anything or against anything. The only thing you're doing is to say, hey, I do not believe in Islam anymore, and that's your crime, and you are killed for that. Now, of course, we can go into how you are given 3 days and you are given the chance to repent, and you don't have to be public about it. You can keep it to yourself. But what is clear is clear. What happens is, I leave Islam because I just don't believe in it anymore. I'm not a hypocrite. Why would I pretend to be a Muslim when I don't believe in it anymore? This is a phenomenon that is happening all over the Muslim world. And just because I don't believe in it anymore, and I explain why I don't believe in it anymore, and I'm not convinced by the authorities that give me 3 days to repent, I'm suddenly sentenced to death. I haven't done anything. I haven't challenged anything. I haven't tried to change anything. I haven't tried to
no, you have.
Change
you
society.
You have changed a lot.
Slowly.
You've changed a lot. You've defected from your family, from your wider community, from your society. That has a huge effect. Like, wait, your parents are still Muslim?
Sorry?
Are your parents still Muslim?
Yes, they are.
So you're telling me that they weren't affected by you leaving Islam?
Of course they were.
So your whole family
is severely harmed.
Yeah, so that's a big harm to them, to their quality of life.
Muslims, because they are told to shun me. How is that?
No, but the point is simply that there's harm caused. The harm has a ripple effect that affects all of society if people start defecting. And like I said, it's universal. All societies have punishments to deter defection, and liberal society is no different. And that's why I bring the example of the civil rights movement. When you have these muscular, defection ideologically is less of a problem when you have a muscular surveillance state, because that state is going to impose technologically, coerce, and force you into compliance. So there's a higher bar because of that state that creates all of these other problems that we already discussed. But when you have an organic social order and you don't have the nation state, then defection becomes much more serious in disrupting and causing massive amounts of harm, violence, and damage to those societies. So those societies have to have very harsh penalties for defection. And even within the muscular state, technocratic state, defection is still punished when it gets to a certain level that it does threaten the order. That's what happened with the civil rights movement. It became a movement, and you had a 1,000,000-man march. You had people who were actually becoming a serious threat. Then the assassination started happening. The brutality started happening. That's free speech according to liberalism.